Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. I hope the wind is at your back. I have with me a friend of the show, a friend of mine who's been on the show a few times before. But let me just give you this introduction for those of you who may be wondering, for those of you who may be seeking. In a world teetering between the old and the emergent, Simon van der El stands as a beacon for the transformative. A scientist turned seeker, Simon bridges the fragmented domains of biology, molecular microbiology, and the metaphysical, unraveling the delicate threads of humanity's great metacrisis. His work explores the intersections of philosophy, neuroscience, shamanic healing, and the psychedelic renaissance, offering an invitation to heal not by doing, but by perceiving wholeness. Simon challenges the paradigms that measure value in metrics and efficiencies, daring to ask, what if the true worth lies in the unquantifiable, our ability to hold space, to witness, to make whole? As a practitioner of wholing, Simon engages in profound journeys into the energetic fields of those who seek him, unveiling stuck patterns, reclaiming the lost, and tuning hearts to their guiding stars. Drawing inspiration from David Bohm's notions of fragmentation, Iain McGilchrist's exploration of the divided brain, and the ancient shamanic traditions, Simon's work is an emergent synthesis of science, spirit, and soul. In these strange times of planetary upheaval, Simon embodies the spirit of the Homo imaginalis, the human poised to reimagine what it means to heal, connect, and evolve. Simon, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
Again, man. Again with this introduction. Holy shit. Thanks. Yeah. And I'm seeing the title is Psychedelic Singularity. It's like, am I the psychedelic singularity? I don't know what we're in for, but no, I'm doing good, George. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. That's great. You outdone yourself again.
Well, I can't help it. Like I always read all the things that you got going up, and it's so refreshing, but so sort of mysterious on some levels. And I always find myself, it's a lot of your work reminds me of Iain McGilchrist, where I got to stop for a minute and reread it. You know what I mean by that? I'm like, okay, what's Simon saying right here? Oh yeah, like the recent post with Buckminster Fuller and talking about where are we going with jobs and this idea that we need to keep ourselves busy. Like it's all of this information is right in front of us, man. I feel like we're on the cusp of a giant change.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I also have the sense that we are in this process of big changes,
right?
Or at least chaos. We're in amidst chaos, and I think what I attempt to do with my writing, and I'm at the moment still writing on LinkedIn. I might want to do like a more a Substack, but I'm a bit of the problem. There's this balance between the perfectionism and the sort of the training in academia and how rigid everything has to be. And at the same time, when I write, why I like writing on LinkedIn is because I just write what's there at the moment. And that's how I like to do most things. So I don't have to think about it too long, because if I start thinking about it too long and brooding on it too long, it already turns stale. It's like you're taking a glass and you're putting it down in a stream. Yeah. And then if you drink at that moment, it's nice, refreshing cold water. But if you then are like, I might have to sit with this for a bit, and you put it away, it probably starts to rot at some point. And then if you then still have to drink it, it will just be disgusting. So I try to avoid doing that.
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting. You know, in our last conversation, we were talking a bit about the metacrisis and the central focus, but how have you seen that kind of playing out? Are you still focusing a lot on the metacrisis, or are you seeing some sort of splits?
Nice. Yeah, I think I've drawn in the metacrisis more to myself, I think. So how does the metacrisis express itself within my consciousness, within how I am in the world, how I show up, how I behave, what kind of things are important to me. So I try to pull it a bit more close, but from that perspective, I also try to see the patterns and what the effect is of the metacrisis. I'm less interested, let's say, in the material side of the metacrisis, like all this work on energy, on energy materials and supply chains and biodiversity, climate, these things. I think I'm more interested in the psycho-spiritual side of things and what kind of effect it has on our individual consciousness. So I'm trying to sort of use myself as a study subject there, and also in the collective. What do we see happening in the collective? And I try to make sense of that. And it's probably as much part of I think a self-soothing process to try to remain sane as far as one can be sane in a time like this, as it's just general interest. It's just fascinating. I think the times that we are living in, and probably terrifying in both the bad sense and in the let's say the exciting sense.
Yeah, I agree. When I see all these giant ideas about like saving the planet and the Metacrisis, we got to transfer this energy. Like it just seems so daunting. I can't help but like, how does that apply to my life? And much like you, I start thinking about my life. Okay, well, what is my climate like? What is the climate in my family like? Like, how do I navigate this storm of everything failing around me? And you can't help but see the patterns there. Like when you look at your life, you can see your own Metacrisis. And I think that for me, that's where psychedelics kind of came in. They sort of gave me this compass on some level, or at least the ability to look around and navigate the environment. Like, okay, just take some deep breaths. Wow, what's this shame doing over here? Jesus, shame. Get the hell. What is this shame thing? Well, I got to get rid of this thing. And like, but it really helps you navigate it, right? How have you noticed psychedelics sort of helping you navigate this internal esoteric struggle?
Nice. Yeah, in different ways and different compounds.
Yeah.
And so I think in our previous conversations, I talked a bit about sort of my way into it, and I think psilocybin with psychoactive truffles played a big role for me in sort of reorienting and reconnecting to myself, and then to the larger self, the local woods, other people around me. It helps a lot with the sort of emotional maturing process in being allowed to or being capable to sit with heavy emotion for longer periods of time, or to have it transform you. So still psilocybin every now and then with low doses. So it's more of a microdosing or mini dosing kind of thing. So for during the week. But in a ceremonial setting, I've been working more with cacao recently. Cacao as being a very nice, heart-warming, heart-opening plant medicine. And working together with blue lotus extract is very, very interesting for me. So that has been by now I'd call it a staple in sort of my medicine cabinet. And also I've been working with cannabis more in a sort of more shamanic sense, which has been interesting because, I come from the Netherlands. I studied in a life sciences university. I had friends who grew their own weed, outdoors, indoors. So during my studies, we smoked a lot of weed, but that was very much in a recreational sense. I never had a lot of difficulty with it concerning my studies or work, these kind of things. So it never became really like a problem for me. But I did notice after a period of smoking weed that I, instead of sort of anxiety reducing, which I think I was self-medicating, but wasn't really aware that I was doing that, it became anxiety increasing. So I had like sweaty palms, heart rate going up, a bit paranoid. And so I quit. and then I got into the PhD process, and so I didn't do it for like, I don't know, like 8 years or something. But recently I re-encountered it, specifically with a tincture. So it's like a whole plant extract in oil. And so you take like 4 drops or something, and it's comparable to edibles, I think. But really, really interesting journeys on that, and very conducive for the type of energetic inquiry that I now often practice. But it gives me the chance to do it on myself instead of doing it on other people. I often have difficulty putting making the time and putting the lens on myself. So it has been very helpful for that.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're going through like a rite of passage sometimes, Simon? Like, when I look back at both of our shared, like our relationship and where we are in life, and I see that you've moved from, sort of the academic side into going out and directly working with people in a field that's sort of novel, and it's interesting to me. I'm curious, like, first off, what does that feel like? Is that a rite of passage for you, moving into something different? And 2, what does that feel like from going and working and exploring your inner self to going out and sharing these ideas and working one-on-one with people or in groups sometimes?
Yeah, nice. Again, nice question. I think the shift from doing the academic work.
Yep.
So I was doing molecular biology, genome engineering, these kind of stuff. So it was very super cognitive, very abstracted. And I did enjoy working with other scientists. So I collaborated a lot. And that was already something that I took most joy out of. Also supervising students and working directly with them, their learning journey. So I always already had this sense of I actually want to work with people. And it doesn't matter that much what then the thing is that we're doing. And I enjoyed the puzzle aspect a lot. But I've noticed that the switch that I've made, so I haven't been in a lab for now, like probably it's now like 5 years or something. And I'm not thinking I'm going to go back anytime soon.
Right.
Maybe I will go into a sort of more improvisational lab and do some work with plant medicine. That might be something that I'm interested in, but let's say not in the capacity in which I worked. But yeah, making the switch to working directly with people and aiding them in their life's process, in their journey, that has been incredibly rewarding and very much feels like a homecoming. So it's because it engages my heart way more than I could put, or that I was able to back then to put in my research. There were moments, of course, where I was very also heart motivated and fascinated with the work that I did. But now, if I work with people, it's super intimate, very moving. And this switch, the transitionary period of being a seeker is first hitting your personal rock bottom, let's say.
Yep.
And then in the framework of the wilderness guide that I enjoy reading, this Bill Plotkin, he talks about soul-centric development, and he has a very a very holistic view of things, but also deep, very influenced by deep ecology. So, and that's let's say a branch of philosophy that I enjoy, and that matches with sort of the shamanic practice. And he talks about how during soul initiation, so after adolescence, you are sent out into the wild, let's say, to, well, more or less like the hero's journey. He describes it differently, but it has similar themes. It's to visit the underworld and die. Let's say the adolescent dies and the adult moves out. But before that happens, you have to have an encounter with soul, how he calls it, soul with a capital S, and he uses a sort of ecological frame for it. So he says that your soul is a ecological niche. So it's your place in the world or in the cosmos where you receive the most energy, let's say. So like organisms that inhabit a certain niche, if they're right in their spot, what they take in is the most nutritious for them, and also what they shed out is the most nutritious for their environment. So finding one's soul is finding one's place in the world, or finding one's niche, one's role. And I think that's the journey that I've been on, and I'm still integrating. But after that stage, he says that like this is initiation, and then after you're a sort of beginning adult. And the beginning adult is, he describes it with a beautiful term. He calls it the artisan at the wellspring. And so you've found the wellspring, which is your soul's image, which is your gift or your niche, what your energy you're coming to share with the world. And the artisanal part is there to figure out, how am I going to share this gift? And so your soul's, it might be for some people that a profession fits perfectly with what they're here to do, like becoming a doctor or a nurse or musician, but for some of us, it's a bit less clear, and that has always been for me the case. So it's more about figuring out, okay, and what are the ways in which I can show up and share my gifts or share my talent with the world in ways that I feed, I nourish those around me, but also I am nourished in return. Yeah.
I love it. It's super inspiring to see, like, both of us speak to lots of different people in the fields we work in. And I'm very fortunate. I get to speak to a lot of people some people are building new novel drug designs. And, I talk to a lot of people in the PTSD community that are working in these labs and working in these settings that are pretty rigid. And I have nothing but love for all of them. But to me, I'm super stoked when I get to talk to you and see this sort of I guess the best way to describe it is to look back to the Arthurian sort of mythologies, right? And the myth of the Holy Grail comes to mind, where all the knights are sitting at the round table, and the Grail shows up to them, and they're like, "You must find me." And so they all go out into the forest, but each individual must enter the forest in the darkest place possible for them. And they cut their own path. And that's what I see, Simon, when I see what you've done and see where you're at. And I read the progress you're doing that you post about, it's super inspiring for me to see you spend all this time in this lab and you're like, you know what? I think there's a different way for me. I'm going to try this. And you go and you talk about all the people that you're talking to, sitting under the forest, what you're learning with, the different plants you're studying with. It's awesome, man. I'm super stoked that you're doing it. And I'm just curious, man. What are you learning when you sit with these other people? Are you learning as much about yourself when you sit with other people?
Yes. Short answer. There is. That's the thing with the healing process. So I've been. So it's been about a year, I think, since we last chat, or even longer. And I've been doing this shamanic training now for 1.5 years, which is way more focused on. So it's without plant medicine. So it's on an Inca tradition. The main focus for shamanic healing is first healing oneself. So if you want to be a channel for healing, you have to have as few dirt within the prism as possible, because then the light shines through easier. And if you have less, unresolved shadow ego parts that might take a hold of what you're wanting to do and then are using it for their own benefit, you try to make sure that doesn't happen. So you're trying to show up as clear as possible for the process someone else is doing. And it's always the case that someone else is doing the healing. The person is doing the healing, and energy that is received and sent through is not mine, but I'm being a conduit for things. And that has been fascinating to step into that space. And now also blending that with, my relationship or my practice with different plant medicines, to see how these parts of me interact, and then bringing together with that this intellectual part, or the academic analytical part of me that also wants to make sense of things, that also tries to make maps and understand, okay, how is this working? What am I what am I doing? Because with the shamanic work, you're constantly surprised at how things happen, and you open certain doors and certain experiences happen, and it's amazing in that sense. So it's a great source of wonder for me. And when you do processes with people, if they come to you with specific questions on parts in their lives or things that they want to release, or they're carrying trauma with them, oftentimes what I do is how I mainly work is through my own body. So I mirror people either online, or if I'm in person, if they're in the Netherlands, then right next to them. So I try to synchronize, let's say, my being with them, so that any ripples that disturb that surface is information. So I just try to tune into what they are experiencing, and then in that tuning in, become very sensitive to minor changes. So imagery, for instance. So nothing is random then. So if I'm talking to someone and they're explaining about a event that they experienced, or ancestral pain, or I'm constantly looking for, okay, where does this, where's the origin of this thing? What's the package there? What's the information? And so anything that changes is information, and either I store it for myself, or I share like, okay, if you're talking about this, how's your lower stomach feeling? Because if they're already talking like for a minute about the theme, and my stomach is constricting heavily, then I'm like, okay, that's probably something to do with whatever you're talking about. So let's have a look. And often the people that I work with, often their themes resonate with my own themes. So with my own healing process. So it's, again, then it also makes it possible for me to journey with them to where they are. I think a big part of healing work has to do with, having done your own healing. And I read somewhere the wounded healer archetype. It's better to heal from your scars than from your open wounds. Because then there's this big chance of your own coping mechanisms, or your own ways how you delude yourself, or how you try to escape. You'll start projecting them on the other person, and that's the last thing that you want to do, especially if people are very vulnerable and sensitive and in their own process. So that's also a big motivator to keep undergoing processes myself with other people that I train with, or do solo journeys and these kind of things. But the themes are, of course, we can talk about how everything is one. We're all tuned into the collective human consciousness, and all these kind of things. So it's different scales of experience, but in the end, indeed, the themes are all the same, or at least they're super recognizable, these archetypical themes. So, yeah.
I think we're touching on the wholeness, the wholing that you describe in a lot of the things that you write about, like whether it's the Jungian mirror, or whether it's the frequencies at which we vibrate that we recognize in the other. But maybe you could talk a little bit more about this wholing. Like, is that, I mean, maybe you could unpack that for some people who may not be familiar with that process.
Yeah. So the word healing, in its etymology, comes from to make whole. So the older word, and in Dutch it's healing, and heal. That's the whole, heal. So healing and hailing, it's the same word. So to make something whole or to heal something is exactly the same word. And so for me, that kind of sparked an interest to have a look at the concept. And very early in my journey, I was reading David Bohm's work and his conversations with Jiddu Krishnamurti, the mystic. And they both have a very, David Bohm was a quantum field theorist, and very brilliant. Was a student of Einstein. I can highly recommend reading some of his work. It's on quantum field theory. The chapters on with math you can just skip. He also says that. So I'm not a mathematician at all. So for me, this is only like I just try to intuitively read, and I get some imagery. But yeah, don't ask me for the calculations. But as I started reading it, he describes a whole universe, or how the how you say, he talks about an implicit and an explicit order, and the explicit order is the reality that we exist in, or that we sort of are currently sort of operating on, which is the unfolded reality. So the explicit is the unfolded, and the implicit is the folded reality, and that makes it possible for, well, everything to be connected, and at the same time we experience it as not. But these are all, let's say, high vague concepts, and of course a lot of spiritual traditions, and also in the New Age, and well, in let's say the more the rigorous scientific fields, they have theories about this. But I mainly hook into the concept of healing, and that wholeness is a state that everything is, or that it's already in. So everything is already whole, is already healed. And why things aren't healed is that when they are perturbed by, for instance, trauma, and something becomes fragmented. So a part of us gets shunted. If we're talking about humans, a part of us gets shunted out of our perception of who we are the moment we are traumatized, depending on, well, what the origin of the trauma is. But we construct a fragment, or we try to build up a persona from fragmented parts, because it's very difficult to perceive ourselves as whole, or what we fully are. And that's, I think, the journey that every human goes on. We start probably from wholeness as we incarnate into a baby, into a body, and then slowly we gain sort of control, or at least we become incarnated in this sort of spacesuit that we're in. And then we kind of lose our memory of where we're from, because the density of matter makes it difficult to remember all that, the information of where we're coming from, or what we are, this energetic field. And then slowly but surely we build up this sort of fragmented ego. But it's probably also built up from parts. But it's a journey towards seeing the wholeness of things, the wholeness of persons, the wholeness of nature, the wholeness in everything. And I think that is what healing is. And that is also, let's say, my main philosophy when I work with people. It's you start from the position that there's nothing wrong with someone. There's nothing wrong. At the worst case, someone is confused about who they are, what they often what they should be, or what they have to be. And it's about calling in these lost parts that we might lost contact with, and seeing if you can reorient oneself to see the wholeness. And that's, I think, also the practice of working with people, is try to see them as whole as possible. Because also in that act of seeing someone's gestalt, or seeing the things that they might not see from themselves, is already calling those parts to the surface, is already calling those parts back into conscious awareness. And in that sense, it doesn't matter too much if they are the one seeing it, or if I'm the one seeing it, because at a certain moment that boundary just blends. Yeah.
Man, it makes a lot of sense to me. I on some level, I begin thinking about the evolution of awareness, but maybe it's not evolution of awareness at all. It's just sort of remembering that you are aware of these things. Like when the way you spoke about calling it back to you, like that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like, when you buy a new car, you see that car everywhere. When you get a new shirt, you see that shirt everywhere. When you become aware that you do this, that you have this pattern, you see it everywhere. It's always there. You're just you're discovering it on some level. Oh yeah, let me just take the cover off of this and I can see it for what it is. I want to include our friend Benjamin George. Shout out to Benjamin George. He's got some incredible new stuff on the horizon. I can't wait to test out these new things he has going. He says existence is founded upon information. The fundamental mechanism of action for interacting information is a toroidal field. It is through interacting fields of toroidal information in which the quantum nature of this arises, and so up through atomic to our perceived reality. The collective movement of all things in the universe is reflected back to us like ripples in the pond. Poetic in a way.
Nice. If I'm correct, the toroidal, that's this movement, right?
I think so.
The torus. Yeah.
Almost like the double helix.
yeah. Or it's like the planet and the magnetic field of the planet and the heliosphere of the sun. These kind of things. Well, interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's
like what when you speak. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about so before I was doing more, or before I was practicing more the shamanism, I was already doing sort of inner development, life coaching, systemic work with people, constellation work. And a big motivator for me with the shamanic work was because it offers a way more subtle, but at the same time more direct way of interacting with people and interacting with what they are carrying with them. And that also alludes to the comment just now with that it's information, energetic fields. You're working with, let's say, a way fuller picture when you're looking at someone. For instance, if I've had moments where I work with someone and they're talking about a certain pattern that repeats itself in their life.
Yep.
And I just try to notice what I notice. And my attention is constantly drawn to, for instance, something above their left shoulder. There's nothing there, as in physically. But as they're talking, I'm just constantly being drawn there.
Yeah.
So I let them talk for a bit, and then I will say, like, okay, can we see if we can interact with whatever is there? And then you guide the attention there, and you start feeling around, for instance, with your hands, and then all of a sudden you notice, or you tap into something of the field. And my trainer often calls it double clicking. So you're almost like you're double clicking a map, and it opens.
Yeah.
So you're double clicking that folder, and they're talking about this pattern. So you're double clicking it, and all of a sudden the emotions are there, the memories are there, and then you can start accessing it and moving through it. You can also make representations of a map, of a folder like that. You can make it physical outdoors, and then directly interact on it like that.
Yeah.
So it's a very it's funny because because of my background, I was atheistic for a long time and very skeptical of a lot of things, even though I did psychedelics when I was 16, I think.
Right.
My framework was completely different, and I could be a bit allergic to like grand claims out of sort of new agey kind of theory. I still can be a bit allergic to that. But in these kind of experiences, it truly feels that the mind is the limiting factor. So really, for certain things, if you leave at least a door open for the potential or the possibility of something being related to ancestral pain, for instance, or past life, parallel life kind of things, or that it's a collective wound, often that creates the space for something to unfold. Because if you're believing that, for instance, every pain, everything that you carry is your responsibility and it's also your fault, for instance, if these kind of conditions are there, then it becomes often very difficult to unravel them, because people are holding on to it because they have I've also had this experience, because you have I think, a limited view of who you are.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I see this pattern, and I'm trying to navigate it in a way, like, there's a lot of talk of trauma, and in some ways it feels like traumatastic. You know what I mean? Like, we make our trauma fantastic. Like, hey, look at my trauma. Look at this thing over here. Everybody, don't you feel bad for me? And like, on some level, I feel like, are we at this place where everyone is sort of coming to the idea of like, okay, maybe I'm not where I want to be because I have this generational trauma, or maybe I'm not where I want to be because I have unrealistic expectations, or maybe I'm not where I want to be, and fill in the blank. But do you think that there is sort of an evolution of awareness when it comes to trauma? And you see it in psychedelics, like psychedelics are used for trauma. It's like this giant medical container that we're in. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. The image that comes up for me, and this is also something that I try to operate under. I'm fairly inspired by sort of more post-humanistic thought. So more. So I'm no scholar, but I did a lot of sort of autodidactical reading. I'm very interested in other ways of perceiving the human, other ways than the individualistic framework that we operate in. Because I think a large part of the issues of the time is this fragmented view on reality, this fragmented view on everything, on who we are as individuals, what the collective is, what the world is, what the cosmos is. So that demands other ways of feeling, other ways of perceiving. So seeing, not necessarily with the eyes, but seeing as a sensing. And with multi-generational trauma, I'm interested in taking the perspective of individual humans, so you and I, all individual humans, being part of a body, and that body makes up the human. So as a planetary organism, and I would say a planetary organ of Gaia, the same that we could call the Amazon the lungs of the earth. These kind of concepts. What if we take that seriously? So that we see the human with a capital organism as a gestalt consciousness. So I think if we talk about collective consciousness, collective unconscious, and that our cells or our bodies are individual cells within that body, and that is marching through time, right? Just like our skin cells, they die within, or I don't actually know. I know that our gut cells, for instance, so some of our gut lining is renewed within a day. So they go through a day, and that's their lifetime. It's the ship of, what is it? The ship of Theseus. Is that? Yeah, exactly. But that's on the global human organismal scale. And then you can think like, okay, I am born into a body from a mother who is connected all the way back to the beginning of life. Mm-hmm. And that human organism Homo sapiens has been estimated around for 300,000 years.
Yeah.
Give or take. We, in our lifetime, we remember, our body stores memory and is conditioned to respond in a certain way to certain memories. So when we are children, we might burn our hands on the stove, or we fall off something, and we get our scars, but we also store that memory within us, and not just in the neurons. I think memory is stored all across the body in a different way. But so when we talk about multi-generational trauma and also about personal trauma, I think it helps a lot to widen the perspective of what is the self made out of, but also what is the content of the self. I think what I try to operate on is that the self is a conscious field, and in general, my body is part of myself. that is where my awareness is, and I consider that myself. But if I go working on a shed, or I try to build something with wood and a hammer and nails, if I'm holding the hammer becomes a sort of extension of my body. So it becomes partially part of myself. So I think the self is a very flexible concept that can encompass a lot of different things. And I think that one of the main things that shamanism, I think, is a very anarchistic tradition of different types of practices and what you can call it. It's playing around with what is the self and what do you feel is the contents of the self. So shape-shifting or astral travel, or extending the self to incorporate the non-human and to gain information from, to ask questions to the non-human, or ask questions to another human, is shapeshift into their consciousness, start reading, feeling. So these are I think, when it comes to multi-generational trauma, it feels very much it helps for me to see it as a collective thing. It also lowers the load of that you are the one that has to carry, or that inherited a lot of heavy shit. It puts away the blame. We don't have to go into the past, look at the stories, who was to blame, whose fault is this, and all this. It's not interesting at all. The interesting thing is to experience, to feel, and to transmute. So what are the lessons there? I sometimes feel like the human is also a species that is probably capable of metamorphosis, similar as insects do. And maybe we became a swarm global organism, similar to, or akin to a caterpillar, by acquiring all these lessons, all this biomass, becoming larger. We're with 8.8 billion, or close to 9 billion. That's a massive increase if we look at the time scale in which that happened. And so maybe there's this, like you said at the beginning, maybe we are in this, or maybe I feel that we are in this state of potential transformation to new forms of being, and that the collective trauma consciousness, or the collective consciousness about trauma, is a necessary step for the decontextualization of the human body. And I mean the human as a collective. So losing the shape of the global industrial society, or this large scale way of doing things, modernity maybe, and becoming aware of the trauma that probably fueled a lot of the behavior and got us to where we are, or at least there's a lot of flag posts of learning. That we integrate those lessons, transmute them, and then potentially, become lighter and have more, let's say, freedom of movement, and then see how the cells reorient themselves into, something else. A homo imaginatus.
That's it, man. Homo imaginalis.
Exactly.
It's so, Simon, that's really, really well said. And as you're talking about that, like, I have this visual of all this necessary trauma, which you hate to think about it being necessary. You hate to think about all these horrible things happening because they became the fuel for what got us to where we are. Whether you use the metaphor of the caterpillar or a swarm of locusts that, their bodies change and they swarm on the fields and they consume everything. It was just this debauchery. and then they change form again when the planets align, or when the weather is right, or when they've, created enough of what is necessary to transform. But I can't help but see us in that metamorphosis. Maybe we should all be reading Ovid again and reading a little bit more about metamorphosis. But, I see it, man. I feel it when I look at my mom, and I look at my daughter, and I look at myself. Like, you can really see some giant shifts that have happened. And, it makes you start guessing like, well, where does the blame go? Well, maybe there is no blame. Maybe these were all necessary things. And then when you think about it from that angle, forgiveness is something that flows to the surface, where there was this pain and this anger of like, how dare they did that? How don't they know? How dare they did that to me? To like, man, look at my daughter. Like, it was necessary. It was necessary. This pain that I felt, someone had to go through it, and that was my lot, and I got it, and it wasn't easy, but you know what? I'm better because of it, and maybe I could go out and now I have this rare gift to see people that are going through it, man. Maybe I should be reaching out to those people that I see are on the cusp of it. I can help them. You know, it's kind of beautiful in a way.
Yeah.
And it means we're going into a better spot, I think. I mean, if you can see it, like, it looks like chaos. It looks like, look, we're on the verge of this nuclear war, but are we really? Or is this what eating through the detritus looks like? Is that what it looks like? This is what it looks like, I think. That this is us as a new form eating through the detritus.
Yeah. And it's both, probably. So I think it's so multi-layered in the amount of different ways of interpreting. And I think we can get, I have to think about, I saw this interview with Iain McGilchrist, and now I have to think who was his name. One of the co-founders of the Dark Mountain Project, Dugald Hein. Maybe I'm mispronouncing his name, British man. And the title of the talk is The World is Not a Problem. And that is super interesting because he's talking to Iain McGilchrist about the left hemisphere's sort of stickiness to seeing the world as a set of problems and holding it in a certain way, in a certain reality, and keeping it in that reality. Well, we all have that experience. So when you have a shitty day or something really bad happened to you, or you can be locked in a certain way of seeing the world. So I've had depressive episodes, and then it's incredibly difficult to see the world in any other way. And it looks very true. It's like I'm right. when you say, oh, this is shit and this is going bad and blah blah, the whole doomer frame, and you can be 100% right, but at the same time there might be other views that are also 100% right, and that you're just looking at a very small part of reality and then extrapolating from that part and seeing the whole as the same as that part. So that demands this way of being humble. It demands letting go of certainty, of saying like, no, this way of seeing it is correct. It asks this more flexible way of seeing things. And that helps as well in the process of seeing oneself, not only the world, but also your own processes. And it helps also with grace and with forgiveness, and also not knowing and keeping that open, especially if there are a lot of, let's say, collective frameworks, political frameworks, or in another sense, maybe ideological frameworks that are moved around and mass amplified because we are in the information age. It helps to discern a bit, because if the world becomes collapsed into sort of dichotomies of frameworks of it's either this or it's either that, and you have to pick one and be part of the right, be part of the guys that get it. It fuels dogmatism, and it fuels division, and it's also a delusional way of seeing things. And at the same time, we also, or I can't help but dream about what does this mean, and then hopefully not dream and become so enamored with my own ways of thinking that I hold it and then say, this is what it is, but then let it go again, have a bit of grace. But it's fun to do the more poetic, and I would say the shamanic of being very fluid with your ideas and how you see the world, because that allows you to move into different points of view. And then, looking at climate change, I'm, for instance, I'm following the projections that indeed a planet that is warming most likely 4 degrees than what we are currently at. Probably, that's just going to be a big mess. We as species and ecosystems will have to adapt to that. And at the same time, we don't know if it's probably the end of the world, but it's the end. It doesn't mean that there's no beginning of another world and after.
Yeah.
So it's the end of the world how we know it. But let's not fully close the door already and say like, this is what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
It's like sitting on the sinking Titanic and then just looking out and I go like, you know what? We'll close the doors, have another champagne. And well, this was it. Because we don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about the idea of like apocalyptic thinking on some level. Like it's contagious and it's interesting and fascinating all at the same time. But when you start thinking about how long we've been here, it's sort of bewildering to think that you and I would just happen to be on Earth when the world ends. Like the world's gonna end, and probably not. Like you and I will both get a front row seat to our own apocalypse. But to be here when the apocalypse for the world happened is kind of arrogant to think like, probably not gonna be here for that.
Yeah.
And I can't help but shake the idea that maybe what we're living through is sort of the unrealized dreams and expectations of a large class of people that are dying. Like when you look at the boomer class around the world, like so many of this particular class are moving on to whatever comes next. Some begrudgingly kicking and fighting the whole way, like, no, I must hold on to this idea. It's important, don't you know? And it is for them. And I'm not downplaying it, but like you can see this sort of brittle ideas of rigidness that like they're gonna break, man. And it's both full of knowledge, it's sad, it's hopeful, it's all these things. But what do you think about maybe what we're seeing is sort of the death of unrealized dreams from a generation of people dying?
Yeah, as you say that, it feels like it's becoming winter. So if the collective human, or let's say the biosphere is a garden, the season is shifting, and I'm seeing these brittle, let's say these sort of these brittle plants that turn brown and that are it's an end. And if we look at the metrics, I think that there is also a large wealth, intergenerational wealth gap, or at least I know that in the US it's definitely the case, but I think in the Netherlands as well. That also says something, right? That that maybe wealth is then locked in a certain parts of the body, in certain organs, which are being sort of having difficulty letting go. Because, for instance, I think many trees, they sort of self-fertilize in a sense, or they fertilize for their offspring when they drop all their leaves. So they cover the forest floor, and that's food again, and those nutrients get recycled, upcycled, and become available for the life within the in the soils, and that's again it's beneficial for the tree, but also for the offspring of the tree. And when that cycle doesn't happen, or it's being stifled, or there's a lot of difficulty letting go, then you see young people struggling. And I think young people aren't doing great, mental health wise. Or at least the metrics are saying such things. I think everybody's feeling it. Let's say the same as if you have an inflamed wound in your toe, you'll get a fever, and your whole body is feeling it. So it doesn't matter where exactly the wounding is happening, but it reverberates throughout the whole system. And I think the planet or the biosphere is being wounded quite a bit, and the human is part of the biosphere, and the humans are also being wounded for quite a bit, I think, in the violence of this economic system that we're part of.
Yeah.
I think everybody's feeling it. And then there's a lot of death terror, a lot of fear of death, especially if you're getting closer to that age. It's I think a collective. I heard it, or I saw it talked about and written about as a collective initiation process. So it's a maturation of the species. And same as the Bill Plotkin's framework, it's a late adolescence, and then you're tossed out into the wilds, or you go into a ritual in which the boy dies and the man arises, or the girl dies and the woman arises. So probably I feel it like this, that we are collectively in this kind of process, and maybe even the Gaia, the planet, is in this process with us as a expression or as a part of that. So in that sense, the planet is also very young. The planet is just figuring it out with this naked ape that has the skills of remembering the past and being quite good at projecting into the future. So that's a whole new skill. That's and then having it completely terraform or completely shape the face of the planet in such a way, it's a wild time to be alive. The amount of power that we wield.
Yeah, for me, it's heartwarming to think. Thanks for sharing that. Like I have never thought about it from that aspect of the planet is sort of in its own rite of passage, and if we can, I tend to believe you don't come into this world, you come out of it. And if the case is that the planet is maturing in a way, so too are we maturing in a way. And you see this sort of, I've spoken a bit about a new awareness emerging. Like it makes sense, and all of a sudden with the awareness of the planet, you have this explosion of large language models. Well, what's language but a way to transfer knowledge to people? And on some levels, when I think of this technology that can be frightening, like I see this sort of transcendence. I talked to Zoltar Istvan yesterday, who's like really big into transhumanism. And we had this fascinating agreement that wasn't necessarily about us merging with machines, but sort of biohacking our way into a better world. And when you think about transhumanism and technology in that sense of psychedelics, like, yeah, maybe this whole confluence is coming together and we are about to take that next step. Each step reveals the next step. And like all of this technology coming together can be very freeing as much as it can be Orwellian, right? Do you have any thoughts on this sort of new technological emergence?
Nice. That's a topic that I think about, and that I have my different ways of perceiving.
Yeah.
I think I'm a bit biased towards sort of form of Luddism. I think I
totally.
I have a bit of I also have issues with just trying to stay sane with the amount of digital technology, screen time, and digital hygiene. And then I just get fed up sometimes. I'm like, why do I have to self-police with these sort of I'd call it parasitical technologies.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of power being wielded, and I think a lot of misalignment of this power towards I'd call it not sanguine or not helpful or healthy goals, not life aligned. And so too, I think transhumanism is like a quite broad spectrum. Right. There are different takes on it. Whenever I detect a death aversion in it, and a wish to overcome death, either through replacing the body with a body that can be rebuilt endlessly, or uploading consciousness to a computer or to whatever else, creating a techno singularity of a god, I get a bit not skeptical, but I also I'm curious as to what is speaking then. If those are unresolved shadow parts, if someone is talking from their own fear of death and seeing that blown up as a collective fear of death, and then wishing to create a alternative where death can be escaped, that feels very, because death is an essential part of existence in this cosmos. Everything
Right.
dies, and at the same time, when something is dying, something else is feeding on it.
Yeah.
So as we were talking about, for instance, the older generations who might have issues with letting go, them not letting go and giving back has an influence on those things that might feed of that death. And there are different ways of how things can die. It's I think we as humans see it as very violent and bad, mostly, or a lot of, that's the cultural narrative. But you can also have for instance, octopus mothers that guard their eggs until they hatch, and then they die, making sort of, I think they give their body to their young to eat on. You can have trees that very slowly lose limbs one by one, and then in that sense are giving back to their environment. So if we think about dying as a process, and if transhumanism is death, the state of death aversion, I don't know if death is even a state of being, but if it's about avoiding that state, I think they also start avoiding the process of dying. And while dying is probably something that is incredibly important, it's a teacher, probably, death.
Yeah.
So that's a bit my take on that side of the technological advance and transhumanism and these kind of things. Well, at the same time, I also understand that there is potential for instance, biohacking, and that is a branch of shamanism, of course, inducing altered states of being or optimizing one's physiology. And I think that I think we talked about that probably last time, but most likely we are, as modern subjects, living in civilization, eating mostly food produced by bioindustry, these kind of things, soil depletion. We are probably living quite malnourished in a sense, and missing vital micronutrients are, as the soil health is declining, so too is our microbiome, our gut microbiome, declining. And that is an organ in our body. And we've only become aware of our gut microbiome only recently. So to get good samples, probably you need to go back into in the fossil record, but I don't know if you can gather. We don't have examples of what does the healthy human gut look like. And how exotic is that? And of course, research, I think, is being done in comparing the gut GI tract of various indigenous cultures who are still living in a, it is also difficult to romanticize these things. But I would say living in a fairly traditional way, as we can expect that for the majority of the history of our species, we've lived as a hunter-gatherer, or at least a species that doesn't live in a industrial scaled cityscape. So comparing the GI tracts and the composition of the gut between those. But yeah, I'm skeptical about all the transhumanist melding with technology, with AI and these kind of things, because I worry about the misalignment of a lot of the why these things are created and with what speed they are created, and also what unconscious drives are motivating the actors. It's the same that the internet is also a large mirror of the collective human consciousness, and a lot of shadow projection that takes place on internet. And I see AI as a sort of accelerant of that. So I'm a bit ambivalent, and it's also personal. I just don't have that much interest in it. I notice I'm not getting very excited with technological advance. I think I get more excited about developments in wisdom, human wisdom development, my personal insight, and more, let's say, interior work, more the spiritual.
Yeah, those are phenomenal points. I found myself biting into the ideas you were talking about, the microbiome in our gut, and that takes me to the ideas of nutrients. There's neurotransmitters in the gut. And a few years back, I had a really cool discussion with Dennis McKenna about neurotransmitters in the gut and like, what does that mean? You know, we talk about the 5H2A receptor, but what does it mean? What happens in the gut? What about the receptors down there? And like, he's like, we don't know, George. We don't know what's happening there. And if you start thinking about that, our diet has a fundamental shift on our consciousness. And that takes me to like books like Jeremy Narby's Cosmic Serpent, where he talks about the indigenous people talking to plants. You know, maybe not like having a full conversation in English, but being aware of what that plant is signaling to you via the shape of its leaves and the markings on it. Like there's real awareness and real information transfer that happens between the human and the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom. And if we don't have a fundamental nutrient healthy gut biome, we're missing all that. We just have these blinders on, like, don't pay attention to that. And maybe that's why when you have a bunch of mushrooms, you're like, whoa, this plant, I'm talking to this plant in a way, and people think you're bananas, but you are in some way exchanging information with that plant, right? I love it, man. It blows my mind, and I feel like I'm in a constant state of awe sometimes. And people are like, dude, this guy does way too many mushrooms, man.
Well, describe too many. Too many for what?
Yeah, it's a great answer.
Yeah. No, man, that's definitely a large motivating part for me as well, to take shamanism seriously. And I think that's also what drew me, is you can have this perspective that there are living cultures in the world who operate on a very different ontology, on a very different way of what is real.
Yes.
So coming from the Western tradition, and also the being trained in the scientific tradition, and just the framework that we operate in, the split between mind and matter, already the split between humans and nature, that doesn't happen in a lot of indigenous cultures. There is no word for nature. So there is no inherent division already. And if you don't see yourself as a almost hermetically sealed organism operating within a hostile environment that has to keep structural integrity, if you can open the barriers between what you consider self, that it goes further than just the spacesuit that you're wearing, and that you're also, if you're touching a tree, that you allow your consciousness to melt with the tree, or with water, or with the sea, or with the elements, with everything, you can do this. Yeah, you can start communicating with the whole field, with everything that's conscious. It might not be intelligent, but it is most likely conscious, or its intelligence shows itself in a completely different way. And for me, that's incredibly exciting, because that indeed also makes I have to think back on that quote that I think McKenna quotes, a lot of people quote. It's like the universe is not only stranger than we can imagine, it's much stranger than we can imagine.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. So if everything is potentially a portal from which you can learn, or which you can communicate with or make contact with, that makes living a lot of more exciting all of a sudden. Huh? And I heard this theory somewhere that, because you touched upon that as well with the blinders, is that the highly individualized subject, as we are operating on within modern society, how we are now, that's almost that is a prerequisite for a society like this to function. So we have to be thinking that we are atomized individuals that um, live in a world of objects instead of other living subjects. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be able to do much of the actions that we do during the day. If you the moment you eat meat, or let's say you go build a house and you're going to use wood for it, if you are constantly aware of how everything is living, how everything is alive in different ways, you would have to treat it with way more humility and respect and love than we are currently doing. And well, say what you want about so eating meat. There are many reasons not to eat industrially grown meat, because the sheer colossal size of the suffering that it's being generated there is mind-boggling. And I think that's also a problem of the times that we are living in. We have to constantly we have to live blinkered, or we have to keep some information out of our framework, because otherwise we won't function, or I won't function. Let's talk about myself.
Yeah.
And this more, I also heard, I think I heard Vanessa Andriotti talk about this with Nadia on the Entangled Life podcast. It was a great episode of the Entangled Life. I think that's it. That there's this theory that we're living in a very dopaminergic society. And it's also what McGilchrist talks about. Mm-hmm. The left hemisphere is more dopaminergic in its wiring, or the main neurotransmitter. And that what would happen if we switch more to a serotonergic framework? So these you talked about psychedelics and how they operate on serotonin receptors.
Yeah.
Well, they stimulate connectivity. They stimulate connections. So making more relations. Yeah. And I think that has been my experience as well. I think the depression that I experienced was mainly one of loneliness and existential dread. Yeah. And by reconnecting and having the aid of these kind of compounds, which would aid my brain, let's say, and maybe my gut as well, most likely, yes, in finding new novel connections, while at the same time immersing myself in environments which I want to connect with. So in this case, it was loved ones and forests and rivers. It sort of opens up the being way more. And that, I think, is a way healthier way of being, but it's also more painful because you're more connected to everything. Yeah. So you're feeling more of the pain. But at a certain point, you might be so depressed, and depressed is a repression of emotion, that you prefer to feel something instead of nothing. And then maybe first it's a lot of grief, pain, anger, sadness. But yeah, then the heart starts breathing again. And then you can also experience joy, love, let's say the more colorful, or the more, let's say, the things that make life worth living. And that I think in that sense, biohacking or paying more attention to these kind of things is very valuable. I think it will have a large... even the sense that a lot of people drink multiple cups of coffee a day, or people smoke. So you're taking plant medicine, you're taking tobacco, and you're taking cacao, or you're taking coffee, or you're drinking, or you're eating a lot of chocolate, so cacao. Yeah, that's plant medicine that you're taking. Well, maybe then expand that to taking a couple, let's say 1 gram of dried mushrooms on a Sunday morning and going out for a stroll with the family or something.
Yeah.
Probably that's very, very healthy.
I can't, I think of mycelium and the way it grows, and what you just explained about making connections. I can't help but see the human mycelium. And you're right. It does feel painful in the beginning because you're building these new roadways, you're building these new maps. And when I apply my consumption of plant medicine primarily psilocybin over the last few years has fundamentally transformed my life into building more meaningful connections and getting rid of the connections that I thought I had to have, that I was thriving on. Maybe the dopamogenic ideas of like, I gotta have more money, I gotta have more of this thing. It's almost like the actions of like a substance abuse problem in a way. We were living our life. And we start looking at maybe the more mycelium route. We're like, look, I'm going to make these new connections. Like I have fundamentally changed so many of my connections. Like my connection with you started back then. And now we're having this discussion and we're halfway across the planet. Like we have built this awesome friendship and relationship that stretches through the internet and like making these cognitive connections and having these, and so many cool people like that. I can't help but see exactly what you were describing about moving into a more serotonergic, I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, but like that kind of connectivity. And what does that mean if more of us can do that? If more of us can create than consume? And that gets us back to the other metaphors we were talking about, like the caterpillar or the locust. Like we're stopping the consuming and beginning the creating, which is more for everybody. When everybody becomes a creator, there's an abundance out there. There is prices come down and there's more for everybody and a better life. I'm really hopeful for that. I see it and I want to help fuel that fire, man.
Nice. Yeah. 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 I'm with you on that one. Yeah.
How do you reconcile the tension between working within existing systems and flowing energy into emerging, less defined ones?
Pooh, yeah, that's you took that from a recent post I wrote. Nice. Yeah, that's that has been difficult.
Yeah.
It's I think that has been a journey that almost everyone goes on in a way of finding their place within the world. But it's, I think, both more difficult and more easy now because the places are shifting. The world as a ecosystem is changing, culture is changing. So what maybe your spot yesterday might change tomorrow, or is different today. So it's asking that it's asking of me that I'm in movement and that I orient myself towards what feels most real and fruitful to me, and that demands courage, and letting things go. And you're confronted with all the stuff. The moment you say like, okay, I want to follow my heart, you'll be presented with all the reasons why you're not doing that just yet. So you're being presented with all the things where you're holding the handbrake yourself. So where are all the things that inhibit you from doing that? And yeah, it's been a sort of rough journey doing that and continuously orienting and having to reorient oneself. Because if you're in that transformational process, I've changed so much within these last couple of years that what I thought I would do 2 years back is already a completely different concept than what I'm thinking now. And then having to think about how to monetize this. And I don't like that concept. So I don't like that we're all operating within a market economy and that every aspect of life has to be monetized. And I sometimes say this, and of course I'm aware that on some places I'm deluding myself or I'm not just seeing things right, but hey, we're human. But I'm thinking like I have no interest in running a company. I don't care about business. I do care about doing interesting and very worthwhile work with people.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do. And I would ideally earn enough from that so I have my rent and my food. And I can do some fun things every now and then or continue to develop. But yeah, not to monetize what I say or what I do. Here's this cool new method and I call it blah blah trademark. All this shit. It's not interesting at all to me. So it has been also a humbling journey of letting go of old forms of thinking, like, okay, what does life look like, or what would life have to look like? And it's like, I don't know. I'm figuring out what it is to be a Dutch shaman, which I have already no clue what. I don't know. Figuring it out as we go.
I love it. It takes courage, man. Like so many of the most interesting people I know are discovering who they are. And like, I think that's part of the process. You know, when you trap yourself into this mindset of, how do I monetize this? You immediately fall into the trap of letting the algorithm lead you along instead of you creating. The moment I struggle with it too. Like the moment you allow yourself to let the idea of monetization creep in is the moment you become less interesting. Right?
Yeah, but again, because it demands abstraction. It demands that you take something and then you create a box around it and you say, this is the method that I sell. It's like my little rat maze that I let people run through. And you take it out of a living system. So what you can do is, of course, create or see if you can monetize presence, see if you can monetize emergence. So that's hence I also sometimes use the word facilitator. So I like holding ceremony with space, or a ceremonial space with people to facilitate emergent developments in their awareness, in their consciousness. So you put people in altered states, either induced by chemically with or just by creating a certain state. You can also induce an altered state by having good dialogue, by creating the space to actually listen to other people, to listen, feel with them, these kind of things. And in that sense, you can monetize your presence. But try doing marketing for that.
I know we're kind of coming up on the close here. I wanted to get into some of the ideas about like the lycos and the maps and the trials and the tribulations that seem to be coming out of trying to monetize clinical. You know, you have these clinical trials so that you can monetize, but it seems like there's all this messy human emotion that gets involved in there, and like things don't work out, and now you got to throw the trial out, and like. But that might have to be a conversation for another day because we only have a few more minutes, man. But what are you most excited about, Simon, coming up? I mean, you have had an incredible journey, and I'm very thankful to get to play a part by watching it and seeing and talking to you. What are you most excited about for the upcoming future here?
Nice, George. And I'm often very excited about just having conversations such as these is something that gives me a lot of joy, because there's emergence here, and I'm excited about the end of this year and stepping into the next year. I'm doing more with my personal practice, my healing practice, working with people across the world. And as my training deepens, my abilities of doing proper work with people also deepen. It becomes way more, I'd call it magical in a sense. So the type of experiences that I'm having both with people and on my own are consistently evolving and deepening. So I think, it's giving me more and more joy thinking about the future in how I'm going to collaborate and also solo create new spaces where I can go on expedition with people, let's say, to move towards healing, and also with the joy that entails. Doesn't all have to be very heavy-handed and sad. So that part, that's something that I'm really excited about, or it's just so enjoyable to also now my relationship with psychedelics, and doing it more in a ceremonial setting. I'm meeting more interesting people who also do energetic work, and collaborating with them in a space like that. That's also something that's very special, because it becomes less and less, journeying becomes less and less a thing of, okay, I take the medicine and I just see if I get sucker punched into I don't know what, and then just undergoing the whole thing. And it becomes more and more a co-creative space where I am moved by the medicine, and moved by the experience, where I can actually shape it as well. So do energetic work, become more aware of what is going on, navigating that space, saying like, okay, we're going to see if we can travel to this place. If you're traveling by yourself, just lying down, knowing that, okay, in my left hip, there's bad shit stored. Let's go into the left hip. And then just being able to do that instead of having the experience be a roll of the dice. And often, of course, it's like planning a hike. You're planning the destination, but maybe the weather is completely different and everything changes.
Yeah.
But you're coming with a good enough map that you can influence what you're doing. And in the absence of a Dutch, or in the absence of a rich local tradition of shamanic plant medicine work, I'm having to figure it out a bit by myself and learn from practitioners who come from other cultures. And that has been also very fun, because that's also very non-dogmatic and free, playful, and humbling. So yeah, that's great. And another thing, conversation as a transformative experience. I've been experimenting as well with channeling, or at least taking objects of interest, subjects of interest, going into an altered state, and sort of allowing the words to pass through, and seeing what kind of terrain you come into then. And then there's having very interesting experiences, and words open up. And I've been thinking about how to, it has been showing in my writing, but a lot of it is so esoteric and strange that I haven't found a good enough, or a format I'm happy with yet. So I probably have to just start trying things, making drawings, making poems, and just sort of getting the creative energy going, and creating from what I'm tapped into or investigating.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I find myself on a very similar journey in so many ways. Simon, you've been gracious with your time. Super stoked to talk to you. We shouldn't have to go this long without a conversation like this, man. I miss talking to you. I feel better after I talk to you, man. And I'm super stoked to see other things you're doing. Where can people find you, man? Like if they hear this conversation and they're like, I'm in the Netherlands, I want to talk to Simon, or maybe they're in Canada or something. How can they find and reach out to you?
So at the moment, my LinkedIn is sort of the only social media thing that I use. I also am on Substack. I haven't written anything yet, but I can be found there. And otherwise, my email is just my name, and then at gmail.com. So people can also email me if they're interested in having a conversation or whatever, scheduling a session.
Yeah.
Well,
fantastic. Everybody within the sound of my voice, go down to the show notes, click on the LinkedIn profile down there. I'll attach it. And if you enjoyed our conversation, reach out to Simon yourself. He's a phenomenal individual, and I think he is leading the way in a lot of different ways. So that's all we got. Hang on briefly afterwards, Simon. But to everybody out there that participated, thank you so much for hanging out with us. That's all we got. Aloha.